forgot the past. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin and endless, like the sky had forgotten how to stop grieving. Elias stood beneath the crooked awning of the small cafe on Maple Street, his fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't drink it. He only held it, as if the warmth it once had might return if he waited patiently enough. Across the street, the old bookstore still stood. The sign above the door, once painted in a proud navy blue, had faded into a tired gray. The letters peeled at the edges. The windows were fogged from inside, though there was no one in there anymore to fog them. He hadn't meant to come back. At least, that's what he told himself when the bus had rolled into town at 1613 that morning. He told himself it was coincidence, that he just needed somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't know him. But this town knew him. It knew the boy who used to sit on the bookstore floor for hours, pretending to read while stealing glances at the girl behind the counter. It knew the night everything fell apart. Elias swallowed hard. "You're shaking?" The cafe owner said gently from the doorway. Mrs. Donnelly hadn't changed much. Her hair had grayed, but her voice was still soft. She studied him like she was trying to piece together an old photograph. "Long trip?" he said, forcing a smile that felt foreign on his face. "You staying long?" He hesitated. The rain filled the silence for him. "I don't know." She nodded as if she understood more than he was saying. Maybe she did. The bell above the cafe door jingled as another customer stepped in, and Elias used the distraction to slip back into his thoughts. He hadn't seen Clara in 7 years. 7 years since the hospital room. 7 years since the white sheets and the machines that beeped too slowly. 7 years since her hand went slack in his. He closed his eyes, and it was there again. The smell of antiseptic, the thin light coming through blinds, the tremble in her voice. "A lie," she had whispered, her lips pale. "Promise me something." He had leaned closer, desperate to memorize the sound of her breathing. Anything. "If I don't make it, don't let this town trap you. Don't live inside this." He had nodded then. He would have promised her the stars if she asked. But he didn't leave because she told him to. He left because he couldn't breathe here anymore. The accident had been his fault. At least, that's what the silence told him every night. The bookstore door creaked open across the street, snapping him back to the present. A woman stepped out, holding a cardboard box. She locked the door carefully, resting her forehead against the glass for a brief moment before turning. Clara's mother. Elias felt the world tilt slightly. She looked smaller than he remembered. Fragile in a way grief makes people fragile. But her eyes were the same. Dark, watchful, and unbearably kind. She saw him. There was no mistaking the flicker of recognition. No mistaking the way her steps faltered. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then she crossed the street. Each step she took felt like a countdown. Elias wanted to run. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to undo everything. Instead, he stood frozen as she stopped in front of him, rain soaking into the shoulders of her coat. "You came back," she said softly. Her voice didn't accuse. That almost hurt more. I didn't know the store was still open," he replied, his words clumsy. "It won't be for much longer." He glanced at the cardboard box in her hands. Old books. Clara's handwriting on the sticky notes, peeking out from between pages. His chest tightened. "I'm closing it," she continued. "Too many memories." He nodded, because he understood that too well. They stood there. Two people bound by something neither of them could fix. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words scraping his throat raw. "I should have." She shook her head gently. "No. But I was driving." And she chose to get in the car. Her voice wavered just slightly. The rain grew heavier, as if the sky needed to drown out what neither of them could say. "She talked about you." "Her mother," said after a moment. "In the hospital?" Elias's breath caught. "She did. She told me you blame yourself." He looked down at the pavement, at the water collecting in uneven cracks. "I do. She didn't." The simplicity of it felt like a blade. "She said you loved her." Her mother continued. "And that was enough. Enough." The word echoed in his mind, like a question he couldn't answer. He had loved her. With a recklessness that only young people mistake for eternity. The night of the accident had been clear and sharp. They were arguing about something stupid. About leaving town. About dreams that felt bigger than the roads that held them. He remembered gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Remembered looking at her instead of the curve ahead. Remembered headlights. Remembered the sound. He hadn't visited her grave. Not once. Coward, he told himself. Clara's mother adjusted the box in her arms. "There's something inside for you," she said. He blinked. "For me," as she nodded. "Come by before I finish packing. I think she'd want you to have it." Before he could respond, she turned and walked back across the street. Elias stood there long, after she disappeared inside the bookstore. The rain didn't stop. It never seemed to, in this town. He set the untouched coffee down on the cafe railing and stepped into the street. Each step toward the bookstore felt heavier than the last, as if the past were reaching up through the pavement, trying to pull him under. He paused in front of the door. Through the glass, he could see shelves half empty. Boxes stacked near the counter. Dust floating in pale light. He pushed the door open. The bell above it rang, bright and cruelly familiar. And for a fleeting second, he could almost hear Clara's voice from behind the counter. "Welcome back, Eli." The words weren't real, but they struck him hard enough that he had to grip the edge of the nearest bookshelf to steady himself. The air inside the bookstore felt the same. Paper and dust, and something faintly floral that had once clung to Clara's sweaters. the scent of her shampoo, lavender, and rain. Boxes lined the wooden floor in uneven rows. Entire sections of shelves stood hollow now, their outlines faintly visible where sunlight had never touched the wood. He stepped forward slowly, like a man entering a sacred place after betraying it. Behind the counter, Clara's mother knelt beside a box labeled Letters. Personal. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You always walked too quietly," she said softly, used to startle her. He tried to smile. It didn't hold. "I didn't want to interrupt her reading." "She liked when you did." The silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Just old. Elias's gaze drifted to the corner near the back window. There it was. The small round table where he and Clara used to sit after closing. 2 mismatched chairs. A faint scratch on the tabletop from the night she had carved their initials into the wood. With a key. Laughing when he told her it was childish. "See," she had said proudly. "So we can't forget." He had rolled his eyes, pretending not to love the idea. Now the carved letters looked fragile, like they might splinter if he touched them. "I thought you'd never come back," her mother said quietly. "I didn't think I could. And now?" He didn't answer immediately. He didn't have one. Now felt like drowning. Now felt like breathing underwater and pretending it was air. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her knees, and lifted a small, worn notebook from the open box. Its cover was soft from years of handling, edges frayed. "She kept this with her," she said, holding it out. Elias stared at it but didn't move. "What is it?" Her journal. The word landed in his chest with terrifying weight. "I shouldn't." "She wrote your name on the first page." His heart stumbled. He stepped forward carefully, as if approaching something that might break. When he took the notebook from her hands, his fingers trembled. It was lighter than he expected. He opened it slowly. Inside, in Clara's looping handwriting, were 2 words. For Elias. His vision blurred instantly. He swallowed hard and turned the page. The ink had faded slightly but remained steady. "If you're reading this, it means you came back, or Mom finally hunted you down. Either way, I'm glad." A broken sound escaped his throat before he could stop it. Her voice lived in those lines. Playful. Warm. So painfully alive. He sank into the nearest chair, without realizing he had moved. She continued. "You always think leaving is the same thing as escaping. It's not. You carry things with you. You carry me." He pressed his lips together, trying to hold himself steady. "I know you, a lie. You'll blame yourself for the accident forever, if someone doesn't stop you. So, I'm trying to stop you." His hands clenched around the edges of the notebook. "It wasn't your fault." The words felt impossible. He could still hear the tires screeching. Still see the curve they missed. Still feel the moment the world spun violently out of control. "You were looking at me. Because I was crying. Because I was scared you'd leave without me. His breath hitched. I asked you to chase something bigger than this town. I pushed you. I wanted more for you. If anyone is guilty of anything, it's me. No, he whispered under his breath. Across the room, her mother pretended not to hear. I don't want you trapped in that night. I don't want you to remember me as a hospital room and machines and goodbye. He wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand. Remember me here. In this bookstore. In the way you'd read terrible poetry out loud, just to make me laugh. A broken laugh escaped him despite himself. Remember the night the power went out, and we lit candles, and made up stories about strangers who never existed. His mind flickered to that memory. The soft glow of candlelight dancing across her face. The way her laughter filled every corner of the store. You once told me you were afraid of being forgotten. He didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like him. You won't be. Not by me. Not by anyone who ever loved you. His chest tightened painfully. But you have to let yourself live. The sentence felt heavier than all the others combined. You think staying away honors me. It doesn't. It just makes the world smaller than it needs to be. He closed his eyes. I couldn't stay. He murmured, though she wasn't there to hear it. I couldn't walk these streets without seeing you everywhere. Ooh. You don't stop seeing someone just because you leave? Her mother said gently from across the room. He looked up at her, startled. She met his gaze steadily. I see her every morning, she continued. In the way the light hits that window. In the sound of the bell above the door. Grief doesn't disappear when you run. He looked back down at the journal. The final lines on the page were written shakier than the rest. If I don't get the chance to grow old with you, promise me you'll grow old anyway. His throat closed completely. Find something beautiful again. He stared at those words for a long time. Find something beautiful again. The bookstore felt impossibly quiet. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, barely audible against the windows. I don't know how, he said finally. Her mother walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You start by forgiving yourself. He shook his head faintly. I don't deserve that. She squeezed his shoulder. She thought you did. The weight of that settled deep inside him, unsettling and fragile. He turned another page in the journal. There were more entries. Fragments of days, memories of them together, fears she never voiced aloud. One entry made his breath falter. He's going to leave one day, and I'm terrified. Not because I'll lose him, but because I'm afraid he'll forget how bright he is when he's not carrying the world on his shoulders. Elias pressed his hand over his mouth. Bright. He hadn't felt that in years. Since the accident, his life had been a series of muted colors. He moved cities, changed jobs, avoided mirrors, avoided anything that required too much feeling. He existed. That was all. I close at 5, her mother said softly. Take your time. She returned to her packing, giving him space. Elias sat there as the afternoon light shifted slowly across the wooden floor. He didn't realize how long he'd been staring at the same page until the shadows grew longer and the bell above the door jingled faintly in the wind. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't trying to forget. He was remembering. And it hurt in a way that felt almost clean. He closed the journal carefully and held it against his chest. Through the front window, he could see the cemetery at the edge of town, just beyond the line of maple trees. He had avoided it all day. Avoided the simple turn of his head that would confirm what he already knew. But Clara's words lingered in his mind. Promise me you'll grow old anyway. He rose slowly from the chair. Her mother looked up as he approached the counter. Thank you, he said. His voice unsteady but sincere. She nodded. She's waiting, she whispered. Elias stepped outside, the air cool and damp against his skin. The rain had finally stopped. For the first time since arriving, he turned toward the cemetery. And he began to walk. The road to the cemetery curved gently uphill, lined with maple trees, stripped nearly bare by the season. Wet leaves clung to the pavement, dark and slick, releasing the faint scent of earth with every step he took. He hadn't walked this path since the day of the funeral. That day had been a blur of black umbrellas and hushed condolences, of hands gripping his shoulders too tightly, of eyes that refused to meet his for long. He remembered standing beside the open grave, feeling like the world had tilted off its axis, while everyone else somehow remained upright. He remembered not crying. Not because he hadn't wanted to, but because something inside him had frozen solid. Now, as he moved beneath the thinning canopy of trees, the air felt heavier than it had that morning. Not oppressive, just honest. The cemetery gates came into view. Tall iron bars with chipped paint and rust blooming along their hinges. They creaked faintly as he pushed them open. The sound echoed in the stillness. Inside, the world seemed quieter, as if even the wind lowered its voice out of respect. Rows of headstones stretched across the damp grass, each one marking a story abruptly ended or gently concluded. He moved slowly between them, his shoes sinking slightly into the softened ground. He didn't need directions. He knew exactly where she was. Third row from the old oak tree. Slightly to the left. A small stone compared to the others. He saw it before he reached it. Clara Bennett, 1997 to 2019. Beloved daughter. Beloved light. Beloved light. His breath faltered. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands, his voice, his body. 7 years. 7 years of silence. I'm sorry, he said, though the words felt unbearably small against the vastness of time. He stepped closer. The grass around her grave had been carefully tended. Fresh flowers rested in a simple vase at the base of the stone. White lilies, slightly bowed from the rain. Her mother must have brought them. He knelt slowly, the damp seeping through the fabric of his jeans. "I should have come sooner," he whispered. The wind stirred faintly through the trees, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic from the edge of town. He placed the journal gently on the ground, in front of the headstone. "I didn't know how to look at this," he admitted. "I didn't know how to look at you without hearing it all again." The crash, the shattering glass, the terrible, sudden silence afterward. He squeezed his eyes shut. For years, I kept thinking if I replayed it enough times in my head, I'd find the moment I could change. The second where I could have looked back at the road. The inch I could have turned the wheel. His voice cracked. "But there isn't one, is there?" The cemetery offered no answer. He let out a shaky breath. "I've been angry at you, you know." The confession startled even him. "Not because you left. I know you didn't mean to. I hated that you were right." He laughed softly, bitterly. "You always said I was running from myself." A tear slid down his cheek, warm against the cold air. "I left this town like it was poison. Like staying meant I'd drown. I moved to 3 different cities. Changed jobs twice. Met people I never let get close." He looked down at his hands. "I kept waiting to feel something again. Anything. But everything felt muted." The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the leaves overhead. He reached out slowly and brushed his fingers against the carved letters of her name. "I didn't visit because I thought it would break me." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But I think not coming broke me more." The words lingered in the space between him and the stone. He pulled the journal closer and opened it again, flipping to the page he'd read earlier. "Find something beautiful again. I don't know what that looks like," he murmured. "Without you." His mind drifted unwillingly to the memory of their last real conversation before the accident. They'd been parked outside the overlook on the edge of town, arguing softly under a sky heavy with stars. "You're scared," Clara had said, her voice gentler than the accusation deserved. "I'm realistic," he'd replied. "You're hiding." He had looked away then, jaw tight. "You think leaving fixes everything?" "No," she'd said. "But staying doesn't either." He remembered the way she'd reached for his hand. "I don't want us to wake up at 40 and realize we never tried." He had loved her ambition. Feared it too. Now, kneeling in front of her grave, he felt that same fear twist through him. "I stopped trying," he admitted. "After you." He swallowed hard. "I thought surviving was enough." The clouds above shifted, and a thin shaft of late afternoon light slipped through, falling gently across the stone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't divine. Just light. But it made her name glow softly for a moment. He exhaled slowly. "Your mom's closing the store." Saying it aloud made it real. "She gave me your journal." He ran his thumb along the edge of the page. You planned this, didn't you? He said faintly. You knew I'd come back eventually. A fragile smile tugged at his lips. You always said I was predictable. He sat back slightly on his heels, feeling the damp earth beneath him. I don't forgive myself, he said after a long pause. Not yet. The honesty of it felt steadier than forced absolution. But I'm tired of hating myself. His chest rose and fell unevenly. I don't want the last thing I carry of you to be guilt. The words hung there, tentative but sincere. Another memory surfaced. Clara dancing barefoot in the bookstore after hours, spinning between shelves while an old record crackled softly in the background. You're impossible, he'd told her, laughing. And you love it? She'd shot back, breathless. He had. God, he had. I loved you, he said now, his voice firm despite the tremor. I still do. The wind eased. The silence that followed didn't feel punishing. It felt listening. He wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. I don't know if I can stay here, he admitted. Not forever. He looked around at the quiet rows of graves, the familiar outline of the town beyond the fence. But maybe leaving doesn't have to mean forgetting. His gaze settled back on her name. Maybe I can carry you without carrying the blame. The thought felt fragile, like glass balanced on its edge. He wasn't sure he trusted it yet. But it was there. He carefully closed the journal and held it against his chest again. I'm going to try, he whispered. I don't know what that means. I don't know what trying looks like. He leaned forward slowly and pressed his forehead against the cool stone. But I'm going to try. The chill seeped into his skin, grounding him. For the first time since that night 7 years ago, the memory of the crash didn't arrive first. Instead, he saw candlelight, laughter, ink, stained fingers. A girl carving their initials into a wooden table, certain the world would never change. He stayed there until the light began to fade completely and the sky deepened into early evening. When he finally stood, his knees stiff and his clothes damp, he didn't feel lighter. Grief didn't evaporate that easily. But something inside him had shifted. Just slightly. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. I'll come back, he said quietly. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The promise felt different from the others he had made. Less desperate. More deliberate. He stepped away from the grave and began walking back toward the gates, the journal tucked safely beneath his arm. Behind him, the cemetery settled into night. Ahead of him, the town lights flickered on one by one. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't look away. The town glowed softly under the deepening blue of evening. Porch lights flickered on. Windows brightened like distant lanterns. The world was moving, quietly, without waiting for him to decide whether he belonged in it. He walked slowly down the hill from the cemetery. The journal pressed firmly against his side, as if it were something alive. Maple Street looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he was just seeing it without the filter of youth. The hardware store still had the crooked sign above its door. The laundromat windows hummed with fluorescent light. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then fell silent. Life continuing. He paused outside the bookstore again. The windows were dark now. The shelves inside were shadows against shadows. A single lamp burned near the back counter, casting a golden pool of light. Clara's mother was still inside. He pushed the door open gently. The bell rang. Quieter now, as if tired. She looked up from behind the counter, where she was sealing another box with careful strips of tape. "You went," she said. "It wasn't a question." He nodded. "I did." She studied his face for a long moment, and something in her expression softened. "Did you say what you needed to say?" He considered the question honestly. "Not everything," he admitted, "but enough for today." She gave a small, understanding nod. "That's how it works." He stepped further inside, glancing around at the nearly empty shelves. "It feels different," he murmured. "It is." She smoothed her hand over the counter's surface, as though memorizing its texture. "I used to think closing this place would feel like losing her all over again," she said quietly. "But I realized something." He waited. "She isn't in these walls." Her voice trembled faintly. "She's in the way I remember." Her laughing when she alphabetized everything twice because you kept putting books back in the wrong section. Despite himself, Elias let out a soft breath of a laugh. That was once. It was weakly. A fragile smile passed between them. The kind built from shared memory instead of shared pain. "What will you do?" he asked gently. "Move closer to my sister," she replied. "Smaller house. Fewer ghosts." He nodded. "That sounds peaceful." "I hope so." A silence settled, but it didn't press down on him like it had earlier. Instead, it felt like space. "Do you remember the night the power went out?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "In the middle of the storm," he said. She nodded. "You two refused to go home." Insisted on staying to guard the literature. A warmth flickered in his chest. "We lit candles," he said softly. Clara said the shadows made the books look like they were breathing. She always had a dramatic streak. She said it made everything feel alive. Her mother smiled faintly. She believed that. Elias looked around the dim room. "She still does," he murmured. The older woman reached beneath the counter and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "I found this in the back office," she said. It was tucked behind a stack of invoices. She handed it to him. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed photograph. Clara, sitting on the bookstore floor, her legs crossed, a book open in her lap. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was laughing at something just out of frame. At him. He remembered that moment. He'd told her she looked like she belonged inside the story she loved. So much. "You're going to leave one day?" she'd teased. "And I'll still be here with my paperbacks." The image felt like a window into a life paused mid-breath. "I can't take this," he said quietly, though he didn't move to return it. "Yes, you can." Her mother's voice was firm, but not unkind. "She wouldn't want you walking around with only the hospital in your head." His throat tightened. "She was more than that," she continued. "And so are you." The words settled deeper than he expected. He stared at the photograph. "I don't know where I'm going," he admitted. "You don't have to," she said gently. "You just have to stop standing still." The simplicity of it nearly undid him. He nodded slowly. "I think I was afraid that if I moved forward, it meant leaving her behind." Her mother stepped around the counter and placed a hand lightly over the frame he was holding. "Love doesn't stay in one place," she said. "It moves with you." Ooh, the store felt warmer somehow. Or maybe it was just him. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, headlights sliding across the darkened windows. "I used to imagine what she'd look like now," Elias said, almost to himself. 7 years older. She'd have cut her hair. Her mother replied instantly. Complained about it. Grown it out again. He smiled faintly. She would have left town. Wes. The answer carried no bitterness. She was never meant to stay small. He traced the edge of the photograph frame. "I stayed small," he said. "For a while." Her gaze met his steadily. "But you came back." The bell above the door gave a soft, accidental jingle as a draft slipped through. Time was moving. "I'm leaving in the morning," Elias said quietly. She nodded, unsurprised. "But not like before." He hesitated. "I'm not running this time." The words felt unfamiliar but steady. "I'm just continuing." She squeezed his arm gently. That's all she ever wanted. He helped her carry the last of the boxes toward the back room. The physical movement felt grounding. Lifting, stacking, sealing. Ordinary things. When everything was finally packed, they stood in the center of the nearly empty store. It echoed now when they shifted their weight. "Would you lock up?" she asked softly. "One last time." His breath caught. "Are you sure?" She nodded and handed him the keys. His fingers closed around the cool metal. She stepped outside first, giving him space. Elias looked around the bookstore slowly. At the carved initials on the table. At the bare shelves. At the faint outlines on the walls, where framed quotes had once hung. He walked to the small round table in the corner. He ran his fingers lightly over the scratched letters. Itlasi. So we can't forget. He swallowed hard. "I won't," he whispered. But the promise felt different now. Not desperate. Not clinging. Just true. He turned off the final lamp. Darkness settled gently, not harshly. He stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind him. The bell rang once more. He locked it carefully and handed the keys back to Clara's mother. She looked at the door for a long moment. "Goodbye," she whispered. He wasn't sure if she meant the store, or her daughter, or both. They stood together under the quiet streetlight. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not hating me." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. There was never anything to hate. The night wrapped around them softly. He held the photograph and the journal close as he stepped back from the bookstore. "I'll visit," he said. "I know." She watched him for a moment longer before turning and walking down the sidewalk, her figure gradually blending into the dim glow of the streetlights. Elias remained where he was, alone on Maple Street, but not empty. He looked up at the sky. The clouds had thinned, revealing a scatter of faint stars. He thought of the overlook at the edge of town, of arguments under constellations, of dreams too large to fit inside small places. He didn't hesitate this time. He turned and began walking toward the old hill beyond the last row of houses. The road stretched ahead of him, quiet and waiting. The hill at the edge of town hadn't changed. It rose gently beyond the last row of houses, where the pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel eventually surrendered to dirt. The overlook sat at the top, marked by a splintered wooden fence that had once been painted white. He and Clara used to come here whenever the world felt too tight. Elias walked slowly, the night air cool against his face, the journal tucked under one arm, and the photograph held carefully in the other hand. The stars above were faint, but steady, scattered across the sky like quiet witnesses. When he reached the top, he stopped. The town spread out below him in soft golden clusters. Streetlights traced familiar roads. A few cars moved lazily through intersections. From up here, everything looked smaller, gentler. He stepped toward the fence and leaned against it, feeling the old wood press into his palms. "This is where you called me a coward," he murmured into the night. The memory came back clearly. They had been sitting on the hood of his car, legs dangling over the edge, arguing about leaving town. "You're scared to want something bigger," Clara had said. "And you're scared to stay." He'd shot back. She'd looked at him then. Not angry, not wounded, just certain. "I'm scared of wasting my life pretending I'm not meant for more." He had loved that fire in her. Feared it too. Now, standing alone beneath the same sky, he understood something he hadn't been ready to accept back then. She hadn't been asking him to leave the town. She'd been asking him to leave his fear. Elias set the photograph carefully against the fence and opened the journal one more time. The pages fluttered slightly in the breeze before settling. He didn't reread the entries. He didn't need to. Her voice was already there, threaded through his thoughts. "Promise me you'll grow old anyway." He exhaled slowly. "I don't know what growing old looks like yet," he said, quietly. I don't even know where I'll wake up next month. A car passed far below on the main road, headlights sweeping briefly across the hillside before disappearing. But I know I don't want to keep surviving like it's a punishment. The words felt steady. True. For a long time, I thought carrying the guilt was the only way to prove I loved you. His fingers tightened around the edge of the journal. I thought if I let myself breathe again, it meant I didn't miss you enough. The wind stirred gently around him. But that's not love, is it? He looked up at the sky. That's fear. The realization didn't arrive like lightning. It came softly. Like something that had been waiting patiently for him to catch up. He reached for the photograph and held it in both hands. Clara's laughter was frozen in that frame. Unaware of endings. Unaware of how short her time would be. She would hate who I've been, he admitted. Not cruelly. Just honestly. She had loved him because he felt things deeply. Because he argued and dreamed and wanted. For 7 years, he had numbed himself into something unrecognizable. I don't want to be a ghost anymore, he whispered. The words surprised him with their force. He had been haunting himself. Haunting the memory of a night he couldn't change. Haunting a version of Clara that only existed in hospital light. He closed the journal carefully and held it against his chest. I forgive you, he said suddenly. The words trembled as they left him. For leaving me. Tears welled in his eyes. For not getting to stay. His voice cracked. For not fighting harder to live. He knew it wasn't rational. She had fought. But grief had made him angry in ways he'd never admitted aloud. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cool glass of the photograph frame. And I'm trying to forgive myself. The attempt felt fragile. Incomplete. But real. He lowered himself to sit on the hood of his car, just like they used to. The metal was cold beneath him. For a long time, he simply looked at the town. At the small houses and quiet streets. At the place that had once felt like a cage. It didn't look like a cage now. It looked like a beginning he had misunderstood. You were never asking me to escape, he said softly. You were asking me to choose. Choose to live. Choose to want. Choose to risk breaking again. He wiped his face with his sleeve and let out a shaky breath that almost resembled a laugh. You were right, he said into the dark. I was predictable. The stars above seemed brighter now that the clouds had fully drifted away. He sat there until the night deepened and the town grew quieter still. Until porch lights blinked off one by one. Until the world felt suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Eventually, he slid off the hood and stood. I'm leaving in the morning, he said again. But this time it didn't feel like an apology. It felt like movement. He picked up the photograph and held it carefully. I'm not leaving you here. Not in the grave. Not in the bookstore. Not in the crash. He would carry her in the candlelight memory. in the laughter, in the scratched initials on a wooden table. He would carry her in the version of himself she had seen when he couldn't. He took one last look at the overlook. At 40, she had once said, teasing him, "You'll finally admit I was right about everything." He smiled through the tears. Probably. The gravel crunched softly under his shoes as he walked back toward the car. The door creaked open with the same familiar sound it had made years ago. He paused before getting inside and looked up at the sky one final time. "I'm going to find something beautiful," he whispered. Not because he had forgotten the past, but because he was finally ready to remember it, without letting it own him. He slid into the driver's seat and set the journal carefully on the passenger side. For a moment, his hands rested on the steering wheel. The memory flickered. Headlights, a curve, a split second of distraction. His breath tightened instinctively. Then he inhaled slowly, deeply. He adjusted his grip. Look at the road. He started the engine. The sound filled the quiet night, steady and grounded. As he drove down the hill, he kept his eyes forward. The town passed by gently. The bookstore, the cafe, the cemetery gates at the edge of the road. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. When he reached the small motel where he was staying, he parked and turned off the engine. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt open. He gathered the photograph and the journal and stepped out into the cool air. Tomorrow, he would leave. He didn't know where he would go. But for the first time in 7 years, the unknown didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. Inside the quiet motel room, he set the photograph on the bedside table. Clara's laughter filled the small space without making it ache. He lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling as exhaustion finally crept into his bones. His last thought before sleep took him wasn't of screeching tires or hospital machines. It was of candlelight. Of shadows that made books look like they were breathing. Of a girl who had once believed he was brighter than he allowed himself to be. And somewhere between grief and mourning, Elias finally let himself believe it too.